I'm Marcus Webb, and the day I found those photographs on my daughter's old iPad was the day my entire world split in half. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand what I lost before you can understand what I did about it. I met my wife Sarah during my final year of grad school at Georgia Tech. I was finishing a master's in electrical engineering. She was in her second year of law school at Emory. A mutual friend introduced us at a barbecue in Midtown Atlanta, and I remember thinking she was the sharpest person I'd ever spoken to. Not just book smart, though she was certainly that. She had this way of reading people, of knowing exactly what to say to make you feel like the most important person in the room. I fell hard, and I fell fast. She took a little longer to come around, maybe 4 months, but once she did, we were inseparable. We got married the summer after she passed the bar. We settled in Charlotte, North Carolina. Sarah joined a mid-sized law firm specializing in family law, which looking back now carries a kind of sick irony. I took a position with a defense contractor doing systems integration work. The pay was excellent, but the job required travel. Not constant travel, but enough. 2 weeks here, 10 days there. Sometimes a month overseas when we were doing installations for NATO allies. Sarah said she understood. She said she was proud of me. She said the girls and her would be just fine. Our first daughter, Natalie, came along 3 years into the marriage. She was all Sarah. Same dark hair, same sharp eyes, same way of tilting her head when she was thinking about something. Our second, Chloe, arrived 2 years later. Chloe was different, lighter features, a quieter temperament, more introspective. I always assumed she took after my mother's side, the Johnsons from Minnesota. Blonde hair runs deep in Scandinavian stock, I told myself. People believe what they want to believe, and I wanted to believe my family was perfect. When the girls were 6 and 8, my company won a massive contract with the Department of Defense. The project required me to spend extended periods at facilities in Virginia, Colorado, and occasionally Germany. I offered to quit. I told Sarah I could take a local engineering position. The pay cut would be significant, but we'd manage. Sarah wouldn't hear of it. "We built a lifestyle, Marcus," she said. "The girls are in private school. We have the house. I can handle things here. I'm a big girl." She always said that. "I'm a big girl." She always said that. "I'm a big girl." Like she was reassuring me. Really? She was clearing the runway. During those years, Sarah developed what I considered a harmless social life outside of work. She joined a wine club, took French cooking classes, and started attending cultural events with her college friend Diane Marchetti. Diane had been an exchange student from Montreal during their Emory days and now worked as a curator at the Beckler Museum of Modern Art in Charlotte. The two of them were thick as thieves. They traveled together occasionally, usually to New York. Sarah said they visited galleries, attended benefit dinners, went to Broadway shows. Diane's family had connections in the art world, and Sarah seemed genuinely enriched by the exposure. I thought it was wonderful. My wife had interests, passions, a life beyond being a mother and a lawyer. What kind of husband would complain about that? I'll tell you what kind. The kind who's paying attention. But I wasn't paying attention. Not for a long time. The first thing I should have noticed was the French. Sarah had never shown any interest in foreign languages during law school or the early years of our marriage. But around the time Natalie turned 10, Sarah started dropping French phrases into conversation. She subscribed to French podcasts. She bought Chloe a Rosetta Stone program for her birthday, calling it a mother-daughter bonding activity. When I asked about it, she said Diane had inspired her. The French cooking classes evolved into a genuine fluency. Sarah would sometimes take phone calls in French, and when I asked who she was talking to, she'd say Diane or Diane's mother in Montreal. It seemed reasonable. Why wouldn't it? The trips to New York increased, once every couple of months at first, then monthly. Sometimes the girls went along. When they came back, Natalie and Chloe were oddly quiet about the details. Not secretive exactly, but evasive. I'd ask what they did, and Natalie would say museum stuff, and Chloe would nod along. If I pressed, they'd change the subject with the practiced ease of children who've been coached. I noticed it but filed it away. Kids are weird about their trips with Mom, I told myself. They probably went shopping and ate too much sugar and don't want me to know. That's what I told myself. The second thing I should have noticed was the photography. When Chloe was about 11, she started showing a genuine talent for it. Sarah bought her an expensive camera, way too expensive for an 11-year-old, and enrolled her in weekend workshops. I thought it was great parenting. Encouraged the kids' interests, right? But the workshops were taught by professionals associated with a studio in New York, and Chloe would occasionally stay with Diane during these workshops. The photos Chloe brought home were remarkable for her age. Moody black and whites, dramatic lighting, careful composition. When I praised her, she beamed but said almost nothing about her instructor, just that he was really talented and nice. The third thing I should have noticed was my bed life improving dramatically when I came back from a 6-week stint in Germany. Sarah was different, more confident, more adventurous, more present in a way she hadn't been. I was flattered. I assumed she missed me. I assumed absence had made the heart grow fonder. I was an idiot. Now here's where the story turns, and I need you to understand the sequence of events precisely because what I did afterward required precision. It was a Saturday in October. Sarah was at a legal conference in Raleigh, or so she said. The girls were both home for fall break. Natalie was 20 and a junior at UVA. Chloe was 18, a freshman at RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. I was helping Chloe transfer old files from her childhood iPad to her laptop when I stumbled across a photo album she'd hidden inside a nested folder labeled School Projects, then Old Drafts, then Miss Care. A 17-year-old hiding things from her parents is hardly news, but these weren't diary entries or inappropriate texts. They were photographs, hundreds of them, spanning what appeared to be 7 years. The photos showed my family at a lake house, a beautiful property on a wooded shore that I had never seen before. Sarah was in many of them, relaxed, laughing, sometimes in a bathrobe, sometimes in an evening dress. Natalie and Chloe were there at various ages, playing on a dock, eating at a long wooden table, opening Christmas presents by a stone fireplace. And in at least 40 of these photos, standing beside my wife with the easy familiarity of a man who belonged there, was someone I did not recognize. Tall, silver-haired, maybe 10 years older than Sarah. Distinguished-looking. The kind of man you'd see on the cover of a magazine about yachts. In several of the photos, his arm was around Sarah. In one, taken by the lake at sunset, they were kissing. Not a peck. The kind of kiss that tells you everything. In another, the girls were in the background, and the man was looking at my wife with an expression I can only describe as ownership. He looked at her the way I thought only I looked at her. I closed the iPad. I went to the bathroom. I threw up. Then I sat on the bathroom floor for about 20 minutes, shaking, trying to breathe, trying to think. When I came out, both girls were in the kitchen making lunch. I looked at them, and something cold settled in my chest, because I realized they both knew. They had always known. They had been there in those photos year after year, and they had never said a word. I didn't confront them that day. I didn't confront Emma that day. I didn't confront anyone, because the rage I felt was not the kind of rage that leads to shouting and throwing things. It was the kind that makes you quiet, the kind that makes you plan. Over the next 2 weeks, while Sarah went about her life as if nothing was wrong, I conducted the most thorough investigation of my adult life. My engineering background taught me to be systematic. My years working with military intelligence contractors taught me to be patient. The man in the photos was David Renault, French-Canadian, born in Quebec City, educated at McGill and Yale Law School. He was not merely Sarah's affair partner, he was a sitting federal magistrate judge in the Southern District of New York. He had held the position for 12 years and, according to legal publications I found online, was on the short list for nomination to a circuit court seat on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. The nomination was expected to be announced within 4 months. David Renault was also Diane Marchetti's uncle. Diane, Sarah's dear college friend. Diane, the curator. Diane, who had facilitated every trip, every excuse, every alibi for at least 7 years, possibly longer. The lake house was Renault's property in the Adirondacks. The photography workshops Chloe attended were taught by an artist Renault patronized. The French wasn't inspired by cooking classes. It was pillow talk. I discovered all of this without accessing a single one of Sarah's devices. Public records, legal databases, property records, social media accounts belonging to Diane's extended family, art gallery guest lists that mention both Renault and Sarah by name at events I never knew she attended. The digital breadcrumbs were everywhere. Sarah hadn't been sloppy because she'd never needed to be. She had an entire support network enabling the deception. Diane was the logistics coordinator. The girls were the unwitting cover story. And I was the paycheck with a security clearance who was conveniently never home. 2 things about David Renault gnawed at me beyond the obvious. First, his wife had died of cancer 6 years ago, meaning that for at least the last 6 years, there was nothing preventing Sarah from leaving me and being with him openly. She chose not to. She wanted both. The lifestyle I provided and the love he provided. I was the wallet. He was the heart. Second, there was Chloe. I had been suppressing a suspicion since the moment I saw those photos. Chloe's lighter features, her artistic temperament, her natural affinity for French, her quiet European mannerisms that I had always attributed to my Scandinavian heritage. Once the suspicion took root, I couldn't shake it. I needed to know. But I needed to be strategic about how I found out. I built my plan in 4 phases. I wrote each phase down in a notebook I kept in my office safe at work. I did not use any electronic device that Sarah could access. I did not search for anything on our home computer. I did not change my behavior in any way. I kissed my wife good morning. I asked about her day. I watched her lie to my face with a smile, and I smiled back. Phase 1 was legal preparation. I retained a divorce attorney named Patricia Kowalski. Patricia was a former prosecutor turned family law specialist, and she had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless. I told her everything. She advised me to file on grounds of irreconcilable differences, which is standard in North Carolina. But she also noted that if I could prove the affair, it could influence equitable distribution and potentially eliminate any alimony claim. She needed evidence. I told her I'd have it. Phase 2 was financial. I spent 3 weekends documenting every asset we owned. The house in Charlotte, appraised at $1.2 million. Sarah's retirement accounts. My retirement accounts. 2 brokerage accounts. The girls' education funds. Our joint savings. I photographed Sarah's jewelry, cataloged the contents of our safe deposit box, and made copies of every bank statement and credit card bill going back 5 years. I also quietly liquidated $40,000 from a personal investment account that predated our marriage, funds Sarah had never tracked or asked about. That money would finance what came next. Phase 3 was intelligence gathering. I hired a private investigator named Carl Briggs. Carl was ex-FBI, methodical, discreet, and expensive. I told Carl I needed 2 things: photographic and video evidence of my wife with David Renault, and I needed it timed to a specific event. The event was the annual American Bar Association's Judicial Excellence Dinner in Washington, D.C., scheduled for January 18th, 3 months away. Legal blogs confirmed that Renault was receiving an award that evening, and I was certain Sarah would attend. Carl said he could deliver. Phase 4 was the one I'm not proud of. But I'm not going to pretend I regret it either. Phase 4 was about making sure everyone who participated in destroying my family felt the full weight of what they'd done. The first move in Phase 4 was Natalie. I drove to UVA on a Thursday afternoon in November, surprising Natalie with a lunch invitation. We went to a quiet Italian place near campus. After the meal, I told her I knew about David Renault, about the lake house, about all of it. Natalie's face went white. She started crying immediately, but I noticed something. She wasn't crying because she felt guilty. She was crying because she'd been caught. I kept my voice level. I told her I needed her to tell me everything, and that her willingness to be honest would determine whether we had a relationship going forward. She resisted at first. She said Mom told us it was complicated. She said Mom said you wouldn't understand. She said Mom said it had nothing to do with how much she loved me. I let her talk. Then I asked how old she was when she first knew. 11, she said. Angela told me. Angela was what the girls called Diane. Not Aunt Diane. Angela. A code name. The casual cruelty of that detail, giving the facilitator of their mother's affair a secret nickname like it was a game, almost broke my composure. I asked Natalie one more question. I asked if she knew whether Chloe was my biological daughter or David's. She looked at me with genuine confusion and said, "Of course she's yours, Dad. You're both our dad." I noted that she didn't actually answer the question. Before I left, I told Natalie that I needed her to submit a DNA sample. I explained that I was sending a testing kit that she should complete and mail back, and that the results would go to both of us. She protested. She cried. She said it didn't matter who contributed the biology. I said it mattered to me. She eventually agreed. Here's the part I need to tell you about, and I need you to understand my state of mind when I made this decision. I was not thinking clearly. I was thinking effectively, which is different. I was thinking like a man who wanted every single person who had lied to him to feel exactly what he felt when he saw those photographs on that iPad. So the DNA sample I provided as mine, the one I sealed in the envelope and told Natalie I'd swabbed from my own cheek, was not mine. It belonged to my colleague Jean-Pierre Fournier, a French-Canadian engineer who worked on my team. I'd asked him for a cheek swab as part of what I told him was a workplace ancestry diversity project. He was happy to participate. He was roughly 85% French-Canadian with Quebecois heritage, genetically indistinguishable from someone of Renault's background. I wanted the results to come back showing that neither girl was my biological child. I wanted Sarah to see those results. I wanted Natalie and Chloe to see them. I wanted them all to feel the ground open beneath them the way it had opened beneath me. Was it cruel? Yes. Was it dishonest? Absolutely. I told my daughter I don't lie, and then I committed a lie of extraordinary proportions. But I was past the point of caring about moral consistency. My wife had maintained a double life for the better part of a decade, and my children had helped her do it. I was going to burn it all down. The weeks between November and January moved with excruciating slowness. I maintained my routine perfectly. Sarah noticed nothing. She continued her monthly trips to New York. She continued her phone calls in French. She continued sleeping next to me every night, as if she hadn't spent 7 years making me a fool. Carl Briggs earned every penny. In December, he documented Sarah entering Renault's apartment building on the Upper West Side. He photographed them having dinner at a restaurant in Tribeca, holding hands across the table. He obtained a video of them entering the lake house in the Adirondacks together on Christmas Eve, my wife who told me she was attending a legal retreat in Asheville. The girls joined them on Christmas Day. Carl's telephoto lens captured the 4 of them through the lake house windows, opening presents, eating dinner, looking for all the world like a happy family. A family that didn't include me. On Christmas morning, I sat alone in our Charlotte house, eating scrambled eggs and reading Carl's surveillance report on my laptop. Sarah had called me the night before, sounding warm and loving, saying she wished she could be home. "Merry Christmas, Marcus," she said. "I love you so much." I said it back. I'm not sure which of us was the better liar at that point. On January 12th, 6 days before the Judicial Excellence Dinner, I received the DNA results. As expected, they indicated that neither Natalie nor Chloe was biologically related to the sample I provided. The results also indicated French-Canadian heritage on the paternal side, which I knew would lead everyone to conclude that Renault was the biological father of both girls. I forwarded the results to Patricia Kowalski, my attorney, with instructions on how to proceed. On January 14th, Sarah told me she needed to go to Washington for a firm event from the 17th through the 19th. She was apologetic. She said she'd make it up to me. She suggested a weekend getaway to Hilton Head afterward. I smiled and told her that sounded wonderful. On the morning of the 17th, I drove Sarah to the airport. I kissed her goodbye. Then I drove to our bank and withdrew the maximum daily amount from our joint account, just under the reporting threshold as Patricia had instructed. Patricia filed the divorce petition that afternoon. On the evening of January 18th, at approximately 8:45 p.m., as David Renault stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Mayflower Hotel accepting the ABA's Award for Judicial Excellence, and as my wife sat at a VIP table smiling up at him in a dress I'd paid for, a process server approached Sarah's table. He handed her an envelope. Beside him, a second person, hired by Patricia, recorded the moment on a concealed camera. Sarah opened the envelope. Inside were 3 items: the divorce petition citing long-standing infidelity, a printed screenshot of Carl's photograph showing her and Renault kissing at the Tribeca restaurant, and the DNA results for both Natalie and Chloe. The process server later described the sequence to Patricia, who relayed it to me. Sarah read the divorce petition first. Her face went rigid. She read it again. Then she looked at the photograph and her hands began to tremble. Then she opened the DNA results. And then, according to the server, she made a sound that he described as something between a gasp and a moan. She stood up from the table, knocking over her wine glass, and walked quickly toward the restroom. She did not return to the ballroom. Renault apparently did not notice the commotion immediately because he was still at the podium, but by the time he returned to the table, Sarah's seat was empty. Red wine was soaking into the white tablecloth, and several guests were looking uncomfortable. The next morning, my phone erupted. Sarah called 17 times before I answered. When I finally picked up, her voice was raw, stripped of every layer of composure she'd ever worn. "Marcus, please," she said. "We need to talk." "I can explain." I said 4 words. "Talk to your lawyer." Then I hung up. Natalie called an hour later, sobbing. "How could you do this, Dad? How could you humiliate her like that?" I told Natalie that her mother had humiliated herself, and that Natalie's participation in the cover-up had forfeited her right to lecture me about decency. There was a long silence. Then she said the DNA test has to be wrong. I said maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but the only way to find out would be another test, and I wasn't interested in providing one. 2 days later, Chloe called. She was calmer than Natalie, which told me she was more frightened. "Dad," she said quietly, "am I not yours?" The question broke something in me. For a moment, just a moment, I nearly told her the truth about the swapped DNA. But then I remembered her in those photographs, smiling at the lake house, opening Christmas presents with Renault, calling Diane Angela. I hardened. I told her the results spoke for themselves and that if she wanted to discuss it further, she could submit another sample and we'd use an independent lab. She agreed immediately. Unlike Natalie, Chloe didn't argue. She just wanted to know. The divorce proceedings consumed the next 8 months. Sarah fought hard initially. She hired a top firm in Charlotte and tried to argue that my surveillance of her constituted invasion of privacy. Patricia demolished that argument. Carl's work had been conducted entirely in public spaces and from public property. The photographs through the lake house windows were taken from a public road with a telephoto lens, which Patricia's research confirmed was legal in New York State. Then Sarah tried a different angle. She claimed that DNA results were fraudulent and demanded court-ordered testing. Patricia objected on procedural grounds, arguing that paternity was irrelevant to the divorce, since both children were legal adults. The judge agreed. No new testing was ordered. But the real leverage was Renault. Sarah's attorney had to know that if the case went to trial, the identity of her affair partner would become a matter of public record. A sitting federal magistrate judge engaged in a 7-year affair with a married woman whose husband had security clearances with the Department of Defense. The legal and political implications were catastrophic. Renault's nomination to the Circuit Court, which had been formally submitted to the Senate Judiciary Committee in December, would be dead on arrival. I never directly threatened to expose Renault. I didn't need to. Patricia simply informed Sarah's attorney that we intended to call witnesses who could testify to the duration and nature of the affair. She provided a list that included Diane Marchetti, 3 restaurant staff members, the caretaker of the Adirondack Lake House, and a photographer named Antoine who had taken portraits of Sarah and Renault together that were hanging in the lake house. Sarah's attorney understood the implications immediately. The settlement was overwhelmingly in my favor. Sarah received her personal belongings, her retirement accounts, and 20% of the equity in the house. No alimony. No claim on my retirement or brokerage accounts. She agreed to continue paying her half of the girl's education costs. In exchange, I agreed to a confidentiality clause preventing me from publicly disclosing the identity of her affair partner. That confidentiality clause was the only concession I made, and I made it for one reason. Phase 4 wasn't finished. 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, an anonymous package arrived at the office of the Senate Judiciary Committee's chief counsel. It contained a selection of Carl's photographs, property records showing Renault's Adirondack Lake House had been visited by the same woman dozens of times over 7 years, and a carefully worded letter suggesting that the nominee's personal conduct warranted additional vetting. The letter was untraceable. The photographs were undeniable. David Renault's nomination was quietly withdrawn 3 weeks later. The official statement cited the nominee's desire to spend more time with family. There was no family. His wife was dead. His children were grown and lived abroad. The phrase was a euphemism, and everyone in legal circles knew it. Sarah called me the day the withdrawal was announced. She was screaming. "You did this," she said. "You destroyed him." I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. I was bound by our confidentiality agreement, and I had honored it. Which was technically true. The package hadn't contained any information covered by the agreement. It contained Carl's photographs, which were my property, and publicly available records. Patricia had reviewed every document before it was sent. I won't admit here or anywhere else that I had anything to do with it. Karma is what I always respond when asked. Now let me tell you about the DNA. When Chloe submitted her second sample to an independent lab, using my actual DNA this time, the results confirmed what I had both hoped and feared. Natalie was my biological daughter. Chloe was not. Chloe was David Renault's child. The results arrived on a Tuesday morning. I sat in my car in the parking garage at work and cried for 45 minutes. Then I called Chloe. I told her the truth. All of it. That I'd swapped the first sample because I wanted everyone to hurt. That Natalie was mine. That she was not. That I loved her regardless and that she would always be my daughter in every way that mattered except one. Chloe was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I will never forget. She said, "I already knew, Dad. I think I've always known. And you're still the one who showed up. David gave me his genes. You gave me everything else." We cried together on the phone for another half hour. Natalie's reaction was different. When she learned I had faked the first DNA test, she was furious. She called me a hypocrite, said I was no better than Mom, said I had gaslit everyone. She wasn't entirely wrong. But Natalie had also spent 7 years watching her mother carry on an affair and had said nothing. She had called Diane Angelo like it was a game. She had looked me in the face every Christmas and lied. I told her I forgave her for that, and I hoped she could eventually forgive me for the DNA deception. She hung up. That was 2 years ago. Natalie still doesn't speak to me. She chose Sarah. They live in the same city now. From what Chloe tells me, Natalie has developed a relationship with Renault, who she apparently visits in New York. She calls him David, not Dad, but the relationship is there. Sarah gave Natalie an ultimatum, me or her, and unlike the story you might expect, Natalie chose her mother. Some acorns don't fall far from the tree. Chloe chose me. She graduated from RSD last spring and is building a career as a photographer in Asheville. She's talented in ways that have nothing to do with Renault's genes, and everything to do with the years I spent taking her to galleries, buying her cameras, and telling her that her eye for beauty was a gift. She brings her boyfriend to dinner every Sunday. He's a good kid, treats her right. Sarah is with Renault now, openly. They live in his apartment on the Upper West Side. His career is effectively over. He was not removed from the bench, but the withdrawal of his nomination was a public humiliation from which his reputation never recovered. He took senior status last year, a semi-retirement that allows him to hear cases on a limited basis. From what I understand, he and Sarah travel frequently. Paris, mostly. I imagine she finally gets to use her French in the proper setting. As for me, I sold the Charlotte house, moved to Asheville to be closer to Chloe, and started dating a woman named Rebecca who teaches high school chemistry. She's kind, she's honest, and she doesn't speak a word of French. Every morning, I wake up in a small house with a mountain view, drink my coffee on the porch, and remind myself that the hardest part is over. Some nights, I still dream about those photographs on the iPad. The lake house. The Christmas presents. The way Renault looked at my wife. And then I wake up and the mountains are still there and the coffee is still hot and the life I built from the wreckage is mine. Every last piece of it. The only thing I'd do differently? I'd have checked that iPad sooner.